A recent study by Slack surveyed workers from around the world about returning to the workplace, and it found a growing divide between executives and professionals on the issue, as well as providing some insight into the continued labor shortage. Slack's Future Forum think tank conducted the research. Its findings were just released today, and here to shed some light on this, the vice president at Future Forum, Sheela Subramanian. Sheela, thank you so much for being here. Just give us your overview of the key findings or takeaways from the report, and then we can dive deeper from there.
Sure. Thank you again for having me. So Future Forum is a consortium that's backed by Slack, and earlier this morning, we released our fourth wave of the survey of 10,000 knowledge workers around the world. So what did we find? Quarter over quarter, flexibility continues to be a top priority. 93% of employees surveyed want flexibility in when they work, and 76% want flexibility in where they work. And the desire for flexibility creates a widening executive-employee disconnect. There's a clear gap when it comes to executive policies and what they're planning on doing, and employee expectations when it comes to returning to the office. So based on our research of those currently working remotely, executives are nearly 3 times more likely than other employees to want to return to the office full time. We've been reading a lot about the Great Resignation, and it's a clear result of this disconnect. 57% of global employees are open to looking for a new job in the next year. So it's really time to meet employees where they are and bridge this disconnect that we're seeing, or else they're going to risk losing talent and falling victim to the Great Resignation.
I want to touch on both those topics you just mentioned there. Obviously, this executive employment disconnect, this great executive employment disconnect. Let's talk about first, what's the driver there, and then we can talk about the labor shortage.
Great, that sounds good. The first thing is just divergent experience. What we're seeing from our research is that executives have 62% higher satisfaction than employees when it comes to work. And they're also experiencing better work-life balance and feel better about managing stress. And that divergent experience is then creating confirmation bias. 2/3 of execs are not including employees in the planning process. Some think they know it best, and some are just operating with a focus group of 1. And the last piece is a lack of transparency. 2/3 of executives think they're being transparent about their post-pandemic work plans, but less than half of employees, 42%, actually agree. And so that lack of transparency is also creating people to not trust what the ultimate plans are post-pandemic.
That's so interesting there in terms of that data point for executives who think they're being transparent and how that's actually being conveyed, or at least the way that employees are seeing that side of the coin. Want to talk about the labor shortage, because what I find interesting in your survey, it highlights this. It shows that more than half of knowledge workers are open to looking for a job next year. But this is what I find really interesting. The biggest flight risk for employers, it looks like working parents and minorities. And I find that latter part even more interesting because your survey also does show that the experience score for Black knowledge workers, that has actually risen quite sharply during this pandemic, during this remote work environment. So why are we seeing kind of that demographic and just, I guess, broader, the minority demographic and working parents demographic being the biggest flight risks?
Yes, so flexibility is especially important for employees of color. What we've seen for Black knowledge workers is that employee experience has actually really increased quarter over the last year in relationships with managers and peers. And what we've seen is that flexibility has helped with that because employees are not forced to code switch when they come into the office or deal with microaggressions day to day. And as an example, every quarter, we've seen sense of belonging actually increase for Black, Asian, and Hispanic knowledge workers. So a higher percentage of Black knowledge workers are open to looking for a new job in the next year, as you just mentioned. So moving backward on flexibility risks erasing the gains that we've seen over the last year and also risks attrition among this group. We're seeing similar sentiment among working parents as well.
In terms of adjusting to kind of bridge this gap between the great executive employee disconnect and then, of course, to keep workers and get new workers to come on board, how are companies adjusting?
There are 3 things that we're seeing is landing with employees, especially for talent. The first is embracing flexibility. It's not just flexibility in where you work. We're hearing a lot about that these days. It's also when you work. And flexibility ranks second behind compensation and benefits when it comes to job satisfaction. The second piece is around inclusion, and leaders need to reskill their managers to shift from gatekeepers to inclusive coaches. Most managers are not equipped to lead distributed teams, and they need to start moving from status checks to coaching people and measuring outcomes rather than activity and presenteeism. And the last piece is around leading with transparency. We spoke about that earlier, but it's okay for leaders to say, I don't know, or we're figuring this out together. That's what employees are preferring right now. They are not looking for leaders to know all the answers. They're looking to be brought in on the planning process and have a voice and not be surprised when things are announced.
Such critical insight into these next couple of months where we're seeing more and more employers create those timelines for returning to work, such key insight into helping that process go a bit more smoother. Thank you so much for being here and joining us, Sheela Subramanian, Vice President at Future Forum.